The Paris Peace Forum was built in 2018 with the idea that global collaboration can be reinvented from the bottom up and that impactful solutions already exist out there. And unfortunately, some of those solutions fall short in achieving their objective and having a systemic change in global governance. And that's where the Scale Up program comes in.
Every year, we have a call for solutions from which 60 projects are showcased at our annual event at the Paris Peace Forum. Out of those projects, we have 10 projects that are selected by a jury to benefit from the year of scale-up support. We try to help them determine the objectives that they want to change within that 1 year with the mentors.
Le rôle d'un mentor est celui de, disons, aider à rester concentré, de dire la vérité, de créer et de faciliter des connexions, des relations et de donner des conseils.
Often the hardest part is to not just get in the room, but to know how to, who to talk to and what things and issues matter to the people you're engaging with. So our mentors were really helpful across all those things.
What was more rewarding is to see that we were able to take the SCUP project from point A to point B, supporting the growth of the project, identifying the blind spots, and helping the project leaders to make significant progress over the course of 1 year.
The Scale program has 3 pillars. So firstly, we have the mentorship, where each project is paired up with 2 high-level experts, the capacity building workshops every month, and a support from the Paris Peace Forum Secretariat.
The types of projects are very diverse and they come from all over the world.
The first day that the war in Ukraine started, we put all our regular activity on hold and we started building the digital infrastructure that was needed by the refugees coming into Romania.
Josia est un programme pour sauvegarder le patrimoine en situation d'urgence. Faire partie du Scale Up programme nous a permis de réaliser à quel point nous agissons pour la paix.
Empatia is a project that promotes the use of AI to solve public issues such as health, development, or climate change.
The purpose of the initiative is to create collaboration on environmental issues across the India-Pakistan border on issues like air pollution, water usage, and sustainable agriculture.
The Scale Up program is an accelerator of global governance solutions. We aim to help project teams be better equipped to influence and challenge governance, and ultimately help them amplify their impact and their reach.
Being recognised for the work we were trying to do to make change globally out of Africa and out of the global south was part of what the Scale Up Award meant for us.
We've had a phenomenal year throughout the SCUP program, and I think the secret to kind of growing and scaling impact is collaboration.
To both project leaders and to experts, we ask them, please join us and get involved with the Scale program.
Monsieur le Ministre, Mesdames et Messieurs, bienvenue à la 7e
Minister,
édition
ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 7th edition of the Paris Peace Forum, which takes place this year at the Palais de Chaillot, which is an important place since it was here that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was prepared at the UN, and so for the 11th of November we have decided to hold the meeting here, hoping that tomorrow evening we will have been able to move forward on coordinating globally for a better world with more solidarity and more peace. So I'll now give the floor to Ángel Gurría, the President of the Paris Peace Forum.
Monsieur le Ministre,
Minister,
Madame la Ministre, Messieurs, Mesdames, les ambassadrices,
ambassadors,
les ambassadeurs, chers amis,
dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ángel Gurría. I am the head of the Paris Peace Forum, and I would like to warmly welcome you here to the Palais de Chaillot for the 7th edition of the Forum.
Dans ce lieu emblématique,
in this emblematic space that faces the Eiffel Tower, and only a few weeks after the end of the Olympic Games, we have decided to organize over 30 discussion sessions on the main challenges of global governance. And tomorrow, there will be about 30 thematic events that will take place in different parts of Paris in an innovative format, and one that is truly exceptional.
As last year, the forum opens in a hot political context. Just a few days ago, presidential elections were held in the United States, with Donald Trump elected. And of course, we know to what extent the positioning of the United States over the next few years will affect the evolution of multilateralism and of global governance. Climate negotiations, but also the outcome of major conflicts currently underway. Ukraine, the Middle East, Sudan, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is why this year we decided to give an important place to geopolitical discussions. The future of the United Nations, the necessary reforms of the international system to make it fairer, make it more efficient, help repair the North-South, but also the East-West divides. In particular, we will continue to reflect on the reform of the international financial institutions. We will also be looking at the emergence of artificial intelligence, discussing the governance of this powerful technology and the best ways of sharing its benefits for the common good. Over the next few days, we will be looking for a world order that functions for everyone, with the aim of encouraging all the players present and all the ones that are not present today, to engage in serious dialogue and show responsibility. I hope that these discussions will be an inspiration for commitment and action, an inspiration for a renewed multilateralism for the 21st century. And I wish you all an excellent forum. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, I'm Jean-Marie Guéhenno. I'm the moderator of the panel on Ukraine. Ukraine is an existential conflict for Ukraine, obviously, but also for the whole of Europe. And it's a conflict that also is critical for the future of what we would want to call an international legal order. C'est donc un grand honneur pour moi d'accueillir.
So it's a great honor for me to welcome the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, France's Minister for Foreign Affairs, who will present France's position on this topic. Thank you, Minister.
Madame la Ministre, chère Elena.
Dear friends, Elena, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, Director General of the Paris Peace Forum, Alexandra, dear friends,
le soutien à l'Ukraine pour mettre en échec l'agression russe.
Support for Ukraine to fight Russia's aggression will remain our priority, a priority for France, but especially a priority for Europe, because it is in Ukraine that the fundamental principles of international order are being defended, as is Europe's security, and other important issues are being played out, such as world food security and nuclear security. Fighting for its security and fighting for its freedom, the Ukrainian people is courageously fighting the law of the most powerful against revisionism and against Russia's attack against the against the global rules that it is infringing. The combat that Ukraine is fighting for liberty and freedom is our struggle as well. Since almost 1,000 days, Ukraine has courageously been exerting its right for legitimate defense, faced with a brutal, aggressive invasion, a war that is unjustifiable and brutal. During my first travels to Ukraine, I symbolically wanted to go to Sumy. 40 kilometers from the front lines, I visited the Ukrainian troops there. This was also a way to pay tribute to these soldiers. 1,000 days of war in Ukraine is 1,000 days of pillaging civilian places, violating humanitarian law, of destroying energy and transport infrastructure, as well as food storage infrastructure, which has had consequences on the global situation. Russia is counting on us tiring of this conflict and of us being divided. And Russia is betting more and more on these factors when it's confronted with a united front. I have no doubt that we will be able to preserve our determination and our unity. And faced with speculation on what the position of a new American administration will be, I believe above all that we should not that we should not decide in advance. The French president said to Donald Trump during their first telephone call since the elections that France is ready to work with the new administration in an ambitious manner and with conviction. With ambition, because we believe that we have to give Ukraine the means to be able to push back against Russia. The EU, as well as France, will continue playing a full role of responsibility in this effort. And it is by maintaining this determination that we will be able to succeed. Ukraine and the international community have too much to lose of Russia's imposing the law of the fittest. I said to the UN that the war carried out by Russia in Ukraine is an open war against international order and international law. It is in no one's interest that Russia should create such a precedent in the 21st century. What is at stake is our security and our collective credibility. We believe that it is for the Ukrainians to define the moment and the conditions in which they may want to launch a negotiated peace. Ukraine suggested a peace formula that we support, and it pushed us to create have a conference here on nuclear safety and security. Ukraine was always open to different initiatives as long as that they were a stakeholder in this process, because we can't do anything for Ukraine without the Ukrainian people. Ukraine has many supporters among the Republican Party in America. Zelensky met the American President Donald Trump several times, and I have no doubt that a strong relationship will be built between the two administrations and that we will be able to preserve the transatlantic unity when it comes to the Ukrainian crisis. As for us, our determination is intact to support the Ukrainian people. In the field of the military, we developed new strategies by providing guided bombs and missiles and Caesar cannons. France is training the Armes de Kiev Brigade in France, which will be ready for combat in 2025. The first Mirage 2000 planes will be delivered to Ukraine at the beginning of 2025, and the KNDS Franco-German group is also working with Ukraine to cooperate on the defense industry there. So we are building a long-term partnership to cooperate with them in the framework of our security agreement that was signed in February 2024. As for civilian support, we are providing humanitarian help by sending various equipments and rehabilitating the energy structure, but we are also providing economic support with a fund of 200 million euros that will help to invest in the country and reinforce the infrastructure there with 25 projects. Out of these 200 million euros, 17 million will be earmarked for urgent projects in the energy sector. The French Development Agency, FD, is also supporting the country with 600 million euros. We are working in the field of education, health, and demining with various projects for the renovation of schools and hospitals, which are long-term projects. So one of these projects is particularly important to me. I mentioned this with Alexandra, and this is the support that France is giving to Ukrainian children. Children are bearing the brunt of the war in Ukraine, but there are also children that were deported or transferred to Russia, and France, with our international partners, has committed to help them. On the 4th of October, I worked with my Canadian counterpart, Mélanie Joly, and I also met children who were repatriated from Russia on the 20th of October. I wish that these children will be able to live their life freely in a sovereign, free country and live in peace. Our support to Ukraine is also very European in nature. Faced with the shock of the 24th of February 2022, the EU showed its determination, its unity, its strength, and its autonomy. there's something that we must remember, a fundamental truth, that the EU is the first supporter of military and civilian support to Ukraine with 118 billion euros in investments and help. We have created the European Facility for Peace, which has allowed for the distribution of military aid and civilian aid. We have the Ukrainian facility that is financed with 50 billion euros. And we also have training projects for the Ukrainian army. A loan of $50 billion that was provided by the G7 countries, which will be reimbursed by Russian assets, will allow us to give us the necessary visibility to continue our support in 2025. This new mechanism will cost nothing to the American taxpayer or the European taxpayer. Working for the future of Ukraine is also imagining what a long-term sustainable peace could be. We're also fighting impunity. Since the beginning of the Russian war of aggression, France has fully supported Ukraine in fighting impunity. France has not forgotten and will never forget Bucha. It will neither will it forget the crimes that were committed on Ukrainian territory for the last 3 years, in Irpin, in Izium, in Mariupol, in Olevnica, and in all these cities around the countries where the civilian infrastructure was targeted methodically by Russia to create maximum damage to the civilian population. No violation of international humanitarian law, no war crime or crime against humanity will be forgotten, because there will be no peace without justice. I would like to commend the recent ratification by Ukraine of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which it will become, from the 1st of January 2025, the 125th member. And there is also the path of Ukraine to join the EU. The Ukrainian people expressed themselves in the last 10 years on the future that they desire for their country. 10 years ago, on Maidan Square in Kiev, they already cried to join the EU. And so it is undeniable that Ukraine's future lies within the EU. The decision to give to Ukraine the status of candidate country last June are historical steps which I am very proud to have been able to work on in my previous post. The progress report of the Commission and what we've seen of the reforms within the country fill us with confidence when it comes to the capacity the country has to move forward in negotiations. I think in many ways Ukraine is no longer at a crossroads, despite the huge challenges presented by the war, and thanks to the tenacity of Ukrainian people, we know that this path is now irreversible. Thank you very much for your attention.
We have heard from the French Foreign Minister the strong commitment of France to Ukraine. I live in the United States, and it is clear that while for many Americans Ukraine is an important strategic issue, it does not have the same emotional and existential force as it has here in France or in Europe in general. And to discuss it and to see how we can renew our commitment to Ukraine, we have a stellar panel. First on my left, Alexandra Matvichuk, well known to all of you, a fighter for human rights, for accountability, whose organization received the Nobel Peace Prize for her courageous work. Next to her, Minister Eltonen from Finland, a country that is on the front line now of a very tense situation. And at the left, Peter Wagner from the European Commission, who is the head of the service that manages all the foreign policy instruments of the European Union. So my first question will be to you, Alexandra. We are in Europe. Sometimes I feel we are like those who are watching the people dealing with COVID, admiring them, but not always taking the same risks. There is comfort in supporting, but we are not engaged in the same way, of course, that you are, having to fight the bombs, having to fight for your life, for the independence of your country. And so I think what we need to hear from you is what is your experience there and how you can share it with all of us fellow Europeans sitting at your side, but not in the same position, and how we can also fight for what the minister reminded us, accountability.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. I will share with you several points. First, as a human rights lawyer, I'm fighting for justice for people affected by this war. And I know that justice is precondition to peace, because Russians, for decades, committing something horrible, they present it like fait accompli and push international community to reckon with it. Russians committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished, and that's why they believe they can do whatever they want. Second, what I want to focus is that this war will define the future not just for Ukraine. This war will define the future for the whole Europe, our common future. I came to Paris from Kiev, and my native city is constantly being shelled, like thousands of other Ukrainian cities, not just by Russian rockets, but also by Iranian drones. China helps Russia to circumvent sanctions and import technologies critical to warfare. North Korea provided to Russia more than 1 million artillery shells and now have sent troops to Russia. Syria votes for Russia in UN General Assembly. All these regimes have something in common. They have the same idea of what a human being is. They consider people as object of control. They denied them in rights and freedoms. And in this regard, Ukraine is not a goal. Ukraine is a tool for Putin and his authoritarian allies how to break international order, how to impose their rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Putin succeeds, he will go further. If Putin succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same. And third, what I want to mention, that we happen to live in rather turbulent times. I don't know how historians in future will call this period, but I know for sure that now we more than ever need a true leadership. We need a true courage. We must defend our values. And this is not abstract term. It's very concrete steps to create a special tribunal on aggression and hold Putin accountable, to confiscate Russian frozen assets and provide Ukraine opportunity for self-defense and reconstruction. I know that the problem is not just in fact that in authoritarian countries the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in well-developed democracies, the people start to put into doubt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We must go through the zone of comfort. We must defend our values. And I hope that it will happen, because I know I'm from the country which have a long-lasting tradition to struggle for freedom in all senses. And you know how Václav Havel, the Czech dissident, defined the term of hope. He told that hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be okay, but this is a huge and deep understanding that everything which you are doing have a sense.
Thank you very much. Let me now turn to Minister Eltonen. You are the Foreign Minister of a country that has a long experience of dealing with Russia. And I think all of us admire the strength and the courage of the Finns when they had to fight Stalin's armies. We hear now sometimes people who use the example of Finland as saying, well, Finland then turned into a neutral country. It had lost a piece of its territory, Karelia, but after all, it was fine for decades. And so some suggest that this is a model for Ukraine. And I know that you don't believe it is the model, and I think it will be important for this audience to hear from you why it is not a model.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I think it's extremely easy to agree with everything that Alexandra said in her beautiful remarks. Well, first of all, it is extremely important that we sharpen our analysis in the regard that it's not only about Ukraine, right? The threat that Russia is, causing for humankind is really existential, and it does not start and it does not end with Ukraine. And having said this, we Finns feel very strong sympathy with the Ukrainians, and of course we think, obviously, based on the UN Charter, based on, international law, Ukraine has the right not only to exist, but for full sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that should not even be something that is debated anywhere, and especially not debated without the Ukrainians themselves, which seems to be also rising in trend. But what comes to this model, that the sort of Finnish model, well, the last time we had to defend our country against Russian aggression was during the Second World War, in the Winter War, and the continuation war thereafter. But so essentially, the Soviet invasion started in 1939. Finland, against all odds, as a much smaller country, was able to fend off the aggression, and yes, there was a peace agreement by which Finland had to give away 12% of its territory. 400,000 people had to evacuate in a matter of a few days to what remained of Finland. And fair enough, you can say that yes, we have, been an independent nation for over 100 years, a stable democracy. We were able to build a society like the rest of Scandinavia based on human rights, democracy, the rule of law. But there are significant differences to the situation we are facing now in Ukraine. And the first one being that back in the year 40, there was no United Nations, there was no UN Charter, there was no rules-based international world order as we know it. So essentially, if we allowed somebody to just use aggression to move borders, to achieve, say, political domination over a sovereign nation, then essentially we would tear apart the rules-based international order, and we could forget about the UN Charter as it is. Second thing, well, obviously everybody in this room also knows what the Second World War was about. There was a division into spheres of influence by two powers in Europe, and Finland just happened to be on the sphere of influence card of this one power, and then there were other nations on the other side. And clearly this is not the world order we would like to see in the future. And third, of course, it is extremely important to note as well that, again, the threat or the aggression that is now manifesting itself in Ukraine by Russia, it can be, and it is actually manifested in so many places as we speak, also outside of Ukraine. So now if we let go of Ukraine, what would happen next? And I think Alexandra pointed out fantastically, I mean, everything that Russia is doing in Africa, for instance, what Russia is doing in the hybrid space in Europe. We have seen, of course, disinformation, cyber attacks for many, many years, but now especially Russia seems to be targeting Central Europe, the likes of Germany and France, what comes to acts of sabotage. And all sorts of kinetic attacks, which are very short of war, essentially. So I think in this debate, it's extremely helpful if we really extend and expand our analysis to really cover what the Russian threat and aggression is about, and try to really counter that as a whole, instead of maybe thinking that why don't we sacrifice, you know, a country or parts of a country for the common good, because I don't think, well, first of all, that sacrifice is something that, you know, humankind would allow us to do, essentially. And the second thing is, of course, that unfortunately that wouldn't pay off for the rest of us either. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, Peter Wagner, in your position in the European Commission, you have a privileged position, obviously, in the management of EU funds for Ukraine, but also of the bilateral support that the member states provide to Ukraine. The Foreign Minister of France, Barrot, reminded us that Europe is actually the first contributor to Ukraine. What we see today is that, as Minister Barrot said, we should not prejudge what the next American administration will do, but nevertheless, there are reasons to be, I mean, I don't have the constraints of a minister, so I can speak more freely. I think we are all a little concerned that, and more than a little concerned, that the support of the United States might stop or be very limited. And so there is really a question now whether Europe is willing and capable to pick up the slack, so to speak. How do you see the situation? How do you see the role of Europe now?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to say a few words from the European perspective, the EU perspective. And let me indeed first say that if we say the EU, this is always the EU and its member states, because a lot of the support that is going to Ukraine is going bilaterally. Secondly, I think it's important to recall we are indeed in different policy instruments managing a number of the instruments, but the EU has mobilized many more. And I think it is fair to say that support to Ukraine, but also the preparation for the challenges that we are all having ahead of us, is what we would call mainstream. It is part of the policies from enlargement to energy to health policies. So it's the whole of the Commission, the whole of the EU institutions that are mobilized. And when being active there, I think our leadership has put words like security, solidarity, but also the need to keep our societies together center stage. That is what we are working towards. And in doing that, we also think that part of it is to not necessarily run into this trap of disinformation, pessimism, skepticism, and I very much appreciate the optimism that was here today. Europe is the EU is a group bringing together 450 million people. We have a GDP of 17 trillion euro. I don't think it is given that we would not be able to face up to the challenges if we prioritize and if we get our act together. And I think, unfortunately, we have gone through difficult times before, which have helped us to prepare. The financial crisis, COVID, at each of these stages, yes, there were frictions, but at each of these stages, the EU was able to mobilize all its instruments, to pull itself together and to also pull member states along. So for us, I think it's not only that over time the EU has contributed to getting more competitiveness. I think by now the EU is also a provider of stability and security, and that is very important for our citizens. Now, what is important there is also for us, from our work, to of course focus on what is happening in Ukraine, what we can do. But we should not forget either, and reference was made to it, of what is also the global impact of what Russia is impacting with its war on Ukraine. Globally, the food security is at risk, is seriously at risk. Globally, energy security, nuclear safety are at risk. These are challenges which we have to address jointly, and where many little elements, from support to the grain exports to support to the stabilization of the energy grid, where the EU is active, are important elements of that. The figures were mentioned. In total, we have so far mobilized around 120 billion euro. That is enormous. It's probably not enough to sustain the effort, but as I said earlier on, given the strength of Europe, of the EU, there is little doubt that we will not be able to mobilize additional support. Support that is on the first hand now, of course, at the moment, the part of weapons, but that is at the same time stabilization, that is starting the reconstruction, and that is many, many other elements that are behind the screen, not necessarily visible. A lot of work is going on what we call accountability. We support the international community in coming together to create these conditions that Russia is held accountable for its deeds. And another element where it's very often forgotten when just throwing around the numbers of what military equipment has been delivered, the EU has welcomed 4 million refugees since the outbreak of the full-scale invasion, and has shown its solidarity also here. Now, as said, it's about security, it's about solidarity, it's about the need to keep our societies together. President Macron has just last week put that in a slightly different scheme, but I think it's the same elements. When speaking in Budapest at the European Political Community, he said, also in view of now what is the situation vis-à-vis the US, he says, we are Europe, we are the EU, we have our part to contribute. And he put it at what are our objectives. It's we have to defend peace on our soil, our wealth, and our democratic model. And that's where many elements like disinformation, etc., are coming in. Allow me a short side element, because we talk about the EU, but I think the European political community and its meeting last week again shows we have more than 700 million people. It's much more than only the EU that is standing together. We might not agree to every small print, but we agree on the overall objective. These are all countries that want this war to end and that want Ukraine to be a free partner for us in the world. In doing this, I don't want to go now through all the elements, but a very important part of it is the work on disinformation. Because of a lot of what I mentioned at the beginning as skepticism, pessimism, is driven by disinformation. There are fake news around, there are enormous efforts done, and you see it very often in the context of elections, but more and more in the daily life, where Russia, but also other malign actors, are trying to change the narrative in our societies. And for us, that is currently one of the biggest challenges that we are facing. So therefore, and here I think we have with Ukraine and Finland 2 countries on stage which have learned a lot over decades, and in the case of Ukraine, in a crash course in the last few years, how to make your societies more resilient, also on this disinformation element that is coming, on the whole effort to destabilize societies, because keeping our societies together is also for us at the European level a very, very important objective. Thank you.
Thank you. You have used the word resilience, and I think that's a critical word for the future of Ukraine, because the morale, the sense of purpose are absolutely vital to sustain the fight that is ongoing. And the question that I would put to our panelists is, beyond the immediate support, so that Ukraine stands up and can resist, beyond that, what kind of political perspective, what kind of support can be given to Ukraine so that there is that sense that the country has a bright future in the middle of what is a horrible tragedy? I don't know who wants to answer first that question. Minister Valtonen.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess resilience is something that really defines the Finns. We indeed have learned the hard lessons in our past, and we have concentrated very heavily on making our society work in all sorts of crises, in all sorts of circumstances, not only through the fact that we essentially have, say, basements for the entire population in order to, in any circumstance, to stay protected. But it's much more than that, and I think our former President Niinistö, who just last week published this report for the European Union, essentially to work on its resilience, has very good many ingredients for making all of our societies just that. And it is exactly very important as well to concentrate on the fact that it's got to do with this narrative thinking as well, because Russia very much likes to, or where it only can, change the narrative to support its idea. Because one of the strongest narratives, which still I do hear around, is that Russia did this to Ukraine because NATO was expanding itself. Well, NATO, let's stop here for a moment, clearly does not proactively expand itself. It does not expand itself by force. It's the free people in democratic nations, just like Finland and Sweden, who choose to join, if allowed to do so. And people, free people, do that for a reason, just like the Ukrainians would like to do it, because it represents them collective power to fend off the aggressor, and it represents freedom. And that is exactly what Finland and Sweden are now also for in NATO, that we want to protect freedom. We are not so worried about ourselves. We have been investing into defense for decades, but we want to put our defense and also our aid to Ukraine to work for a more prosperous and obviously a free future for everybody. And I think this starts very much in the minds of people. If you truly are free, then of course you can analyze the situation as it is, and you are able to speak your mind. Extremely important ingredients of a free and resilient society. And the second thing is, and this is exactly the distinction between autocracies and democracies, to which degree you really value the freedom of people to choose. And I think this is actually what what Russia is most concerned about. People's freedom to choose would imply that also in Russia, things would change dramatically.
Thank you.
I will tell several points, and first I will start and totally agree with my colleague point that this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014. And in February 2014, Ukraine was neutral. Ukraine had a zero chance to join to NATO. But what Ukraine had a chance to start democratic transition after the collapse of the authoritarian regime due to revolution of dignity. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of ideas of freedom which came closer to Russian border. Second, what I want to mention, this morning I was told that in this historical building, the UN Convention Against Genocide was signed. And let me remind you that Putin openly says that there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. For 10 years, we have been documenting how these words converted in horrible practice. When Russian troops deliberately exterminated active local people in the ground, mayors, journalists, children writers, priests, environmentalists, teachers, any active people of community, how they banned Ukrainian language and culture, how they robbed and destroyed Ukrainian cultural heritage. And even when we speak about this illegal kidnapping Ukrainian children and transferring them to Russia, it's also just a part of the genocidal policy because Ukrainian children are put in Russian education camps where they told they are not Ukrainian, they're Russian children. Their parents refused from them, and they will be supposed to be adopted by Russian families who will bring them up as Russians. So let's be clear, we have no other choice. If we stop fighting, it will be no more us. And how international community can help? When large-scale war started, international community told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And Ukraine received first weapons to be able to defend ourselves. And first, real sanctions against Russia were introduced into force. And we're extremely grateful because it helped us to survive. But it's also an explanation why Ukraine was waiting for a first modern tank for more than a year. And the delay and the sharp political debate around these issues resulted in numerous deaths. It's also an answer why Ukraine was waiting for a first modern plane for more than 2 years. And it also caused in numerous deaths. Because we have to change this narrative. Let's help Ukraine to win. Because there is a huge difference between let's help Ukraine not to fail and let's help Ukraine to win. And we can practically measure this difference in types of weapons, in speed of decisions, in gravity of sanctions. Success of Ukraine, it's important not just for people in Ukraine. Success of Ukraine will provide a chance for democratic future of Russia itself. And that's why, when I ask my Russian human rights colleagues how I can help them, they always responded, if you want to help us, please be successful.
Maybe very briefly, 3 points. And thank you very much for mentioning the Ninister report. We're throwing around in Brussels jargon always Draghi report on the economy. Now, indeed, recently delivered the Ninister report on resilience. And it's a very important report. We went through it with our teams because it will influence a number of our activities in internal but also in external policies. But let me first maybe come to the question of what can we do for Ukraine to help building this resilience. And for Ukraine, at the same time, that's always then something that we're doing for us ourselves, working on the enlargement perspective in a credible manner. And that is meaning helping to keep on track this development which was already set out, which started in 2013, which potentially even for many people started before, and which is the Ukrainian people's choice for the democratic path. That is the key element in it. And there we have a lot to do beyond delivering weapons and reconstructing the country in its infrastructure. There's a lot of support that we are providing in helping to stabilize, and it's very often small things that matter. Last year we were here in Paris at the Peace Forum with an exhibition of work that we're doing funding as EU in the protection of cultural heritage. Because I think it's not a coincidence, but now it's very obvious that there's a systematic destruction of Ukrainian museums, of Ukrainian culture and heritage. And that was set out already for very good reasons from the Russian perspective. Secondly, I think it is important that we help keeping the social cohesion in Ukraine, as much as on our side, but also in Ukraine, up. So we are also now increasingly starting to work on issues like the reintegration of veterans. If you are in Ukraine, and I'm old enough to remember what some German cities looked like a few years after the end of the Second World War, where veterans, people with missing limbs, were just part of what we saw. We have forgotten about that. In Ukraine, you see it. You arrive at the train station, you see the first people there. And that is something where we will also have to help the country to reintegrate these people who come back with not only physical scars and very deep scars. Third point is where I think the EU has to do something in its own interest, in Ukraine's interest, but in the global interest. That is, yes, we have to put a very strong emphasis on the support to Ukraine, on the work there, because that is for us a question of overall long-term survival with our also societal model. But it is as important for us that we continue playing a role as a credible actor at the global stage. Multilateralism. The fact that we keep equally important on our radar screen the efforts to solve conflicts in the Middle East, trying to contribute to improving the situation in Sudan. Some of the countries were mentioned. That is very important because what we see is those countries have very often a much better understanding of the situation in Ukraine and the threat under which the Ukrainian people are than we do.
Thank you. I would like now to open for questions from the audience. When you ask a question, please identify yourself. If the question is, if you would like an answer from one specific member of the panel, please tell us. So who would like to ask the first question? I think I don't, with the light, I don't see, so if someone wants to ask a question, please stand up. Yeah, yes, I think there is a gentleman on the right there.
Simeon Chomakos from the Delphi Economic Forum.
Okay.
What is going to happen if the United States, Donald Trump, stops the support to Ukraine?
Thank you. Who wants to ask that question? Who wants to answer that question? I would say myself first that it depends. There is a question of will and there is a question of capacities. The question of will is a political question. What are the differences between European member states on that? And the question of capacities is a very practical question. Is there a sufficient industrial base to step up in the production of ammunition and all the practical things that need to be done? Minister Eltonen?
Well, Europe simply has to do much, much more, and we will do more This is not to say that I expect that decision from even the team of Donald Trump, and I hope there will be some good news still this year from the United States. But that's their decision, and we can concentrate only on what we have influence on, and that certainly is that as Europe you have to do more. And I'm speaking this not only of course as a European country, but Finland as part of the Nordic countries. We are actually the second largest donor of military aid to Ukraine. So Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway and Iceland together, of course, together with the Baltic states also or around the Baltic Sea, we are very committed to helping Ukraine. And I think it's extremely important to realize, well, first of all, we have come very, very far already in the past 3 years. It is not like that we would be starting from scratch. And I think it's extremely important that we also have this positive message along, because people do feel some sort of war fatigue, which I think in the West, like in my country, we shouldn't be entitled to that, because obviously we are not at the front, we are not fighting. It is not our men who are sent to the front line. So there shouldn't be fatigue to that end. But the optimism has to also stem from the fact that if we compare Europe 3 years ago to where we are now, we have come a seriously long way. Nobody thought 3 years ago that it would be, say, Germany sending, tanks to Ukraine, that it was even possible, or any sort of military equipment. That decision was made fairly early on, and of course the quantities have been significant. Second, how we do realize, even though it has taken perhaps a little bit longer than we thought or expected and hoped, how important it is to ramp up our defense industry. And also in that, we have been able to increase capacity, and I'm speaking for all of Europe, and now also aiding Ukrainian defense industry also to ramp up, and financing that, I think, is a key component of it as well. And third, if we think NATO or overall also as Europe, as the European Union, how we do see defense and deterrence, it is again a serious topic and something that everybody looks to concentrate on. But as a final note to this, if we think only a few years back, the COVID crisis that hit Europe, or the world, and of course, but speaking about Europe now, we were able, in a matter of a couple of months, put together a seriously massive financial package, essentially for the aid of Southern Europe, of countries who were most affected by the virus. Of course, all of Europe was. And every European country contributed according to their capital key or their GDP key. Now we are doing this, of course, to an extent with the European Peace Facility and other facilities in the European Union. But we're talking quantities which are this size. I mean, the COVID package was 750 billion euros. And we have countries in Europe who struggle putting together, say, 2 billion of aid to Ukraine. I think we can do so much more. We have the money, we have the capacity. I mean, the industry, the Industrial Revolution started in Europe. We can do this. And I think, as stated earlier, it's not just for Ukraine. It is for the future of democracy and the free will of people. And clearly, if there was, a case like Alexandra said, that Ukraine was having to put their weapons down or something like that, well, of course, that would only mean not an end to the war, but an end to Ukraine, and that's not what we want.
Yeah, we have the money, but when I look at the European defense industry, I see that sometimes they're prepared to do things, but they want, if they make a new investment to build a new plant, they want to be sure that the commitment will be a multi-year commitment. They're not prepared just to do something and then have an investment that will not be covered by returns. And so the lack of a perspective in the future is a big issue. Peter Wagner, I think you want.
Yes, thank you. That's indeed one of the elements which I also wanted to stress. Firstly, I can only underline from the Brussels perspective that we know what to do, we know how to do it, and we could mobilize the means. Now, it is not Americans tomorrow out, we deliver the same things the day after tomorrow. But the structural capacity within a reasonable framework to deliver what Ukraine needs is, in our understanding, there. And the minister himself mentioned, for example, the French Caesar howitzers. When I remember what 3 years ago one discussed as a possible increase of the production, and where we are now in reality, these are extraordinary numbers. Secondly, again, Ukraine has to play a role in this equation. Ukraine has upscaled its defense capabilities very much faster, but also with much more creativity in many areas than what we have been doing with our traditional approach, and which we are also now adapting. And as EU, we have, from the so-called windfall profits of the frozen Russian assets, we have in summer, for the first time, bought weapons in Ukraine produced, and we hope that we can continue doing that also in the future. And it is true, industry needs, as any industry, a vision, a long-term vision, a perspective. And that is why it is so important that we communicate consistently that this is not an issue which, whatever happens, is over in 8 months or 10 months. The structural problem that we are facing in our societies and at the global level is there, and it is very big. And that is also why a number of activities that are already underway are so important. We talk abstractly at the moment for a while already about strategic autonomy. Now we will have to see, do we have the strategic autonomy to also get all the material equipment produced that we want to do? But overall, I would like to fully agree with the minister that we know what to do, we can generate the means, and we know how to deploy them.
Alexandra.
It's a very good question to ask, especially taking into account that Ukraine is resistant to Russian aggression, and Russia is a huge and enormous opposing power. And when you don't help Ukraine to resist, it just means that you help Russia to occupy Ukraine. And I think that we have to frame this question very properly, that this is a question not just for Ukraine, but for the whole Europe, because Russia is empire, and empire has a center, but empire has no borders. And it's not me who said this. This Vladimir Putin quote, when he told that the borders of Russia will never end. So it's obvious. If we not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further. European Union are safe only because Ukrainians are still fighting. I see it even from my human rights work. When I interviewed people who survived Russian captivity, they told me that Russians describe their future like this. First, we will occupy Ukraine, and then, together with you, we will go to conquer in other countries. And process of forcible mobilization of Ukrainians to Russian army all these years is going on in occupied territories. So this war has a very vivid value dimension. It's not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And in this war, we are fighting for freedom, which have no limitation in national borders, and only spread of freedom make our world safer. And yes, unfortunately, international order is collapsed, and now as a human rights lawyer, I have no legal instrument how to stop Russian atrocities. So just to add to this conversation some practical topic, let's make localization of military facility production and do it in Ukraine. We are ready. We want to survive. We are very creative. We prove it. It's not just the words. We prove it during all these years in the battlefield, in peaceful cities, where universities are working without heating and lights during the winters.
Well, Peter Wagner said that we have the capacities to respond in a structural way. What I get from this magnificent panel is the sense that it's a political issue first and foremost. It's about our identity. I would say it's also about the identity of Russia. Someone said once that Russia became an empire before it was a nation. And so the question of the Russian identity is at play in how it relates to Ukraine. But it's at play for the Europeans, for all of us. What is Europe for us? What binds us together? Is it just the fear of immigrants, the fear of foreigners? Or is it something more positive? Is it a sense of law, of human relations built on a shared vision of human rights? That is the question that is before us today. And that is the question where we are going to be tested. But I must say, when I listen to you, Alexandra, I think you are an example of the kind of commitment that we admire, but we need not just admire it, we need to emulate it. And so thank you for bringing us to that point where we feel that common commitment.